This is the third lesson in our first review unit, and we're going to just quickly talk about absolute value. So again, just a quick reminder, since it's still the beginning of the year, still new to this, make sure you put your title at the top of your Cornell notes. Make sure you put the date in the upper right-hand corner, and then make sure that you have the learning goal underneath the title. So today's learning goal, students will understand what the absolute value of a number represents. We already talked about this a little bit in a couple of our other lessons on multiplying and dividing. But let's review. You may have heard these terms in your science class before, speed and velocity. But speed and velocity are different, and they're different kind of like absolute value is different. So the speed of something, what do you think of when you think of speed? Speed is how fast something goes. But velocity is not only how fast it goes, but also the direction it goes in. So you can see my little dude over here, he's getting ready to just take off, go down the beach super fast, and he's going to go that way, right? So his velocity would be, I don't know, maybe 3 miles per hour, and he's going to the left. The speed is just 3 miles per hour. So how does that relate to absolute value? Well, absolute value is kind of like speed. It's a lot less like velocity. Velocity has direction, right? It could be positive, it could be negative. You're going forwards or you're going backwards. But speed is just how fast you're going. If I'm running down the beach at 3 miles an hour, it doesn't really matter which direction I'm running. I'm still running 3 miles an hour. So absolute value is a little bit like speed. We define the absolute value of a number as its distance from zero. And we did talk about this the other day. So when you look at 0 on the number line, you want to say, well, how far is a number away from 0? So for example, the number 3 is 3 units away from 0, but of course so is the number -3. So from now on, I don't really want you to just think of absolute value as making a number positive. I want you to think of absolute value as a distance, and it's distance from 0. And of course, distance we don't think of as negative. So let's do a couple of definitions here. If we have a number, if the number a is a positive number, then the absolute value of a would be just a. So if a was a positive number, I don't know, like the number 3, like we just looked at, then the absolute value of 3 would be just a, or just 3. If a was 0, then the absolute value of a would be 0. So of course, if a equals 0, then we have the absolute value of 0 is 0. Think about it. How far is 0 from 0? 0 units, right? Okay, let's look at this last one. The last one's a little bit confusing. It says if a is negative, then the absolute value of a is negative a. This goes back to the idea of a negative being the opposite, right? Usually you'd say, wait a minute, absolute value can't be negative. But if a negative means the opposite, and a was originally negative, then it works. Let's highlight this with an example. Let's say a had the value of -4. Then the absolute value of -4 would be the opposite. I'm going to highlight this negative in red here. Would be the opposite of a. Well, what was a? A was -4. So what is the opposite of -4? +4. So that's how we can represent absolute value for positive numbers, negative numbers, and 0. Now let's do some actual examples. Okay, so example 1, I've got 4 different examples here. Evaluate each of these expressions. All right, the first one's easy. The absolute value of 7. How far is 7 away from 0? 7 units. What about the absolute value of negative 4.9? Okay, well that's 4.9 units away from 0. That wasn't too hard either. What about the third one here? Notice that my absolute value is on the outside, or excuse me, the negative sign is on the outside of the absolute value. So negative absolute value of 3/2 would be negative 3/2. The absolute value of 3/2 is 3/2, and then we make it negative. If you think about order of operations, usually when we think of order of operations, we think of PEMDAS, right? Where the P in PEMDAS stands for parentheses, but really it should stand for grouping symbols. An absolute value is like a grouping symbol. You have to do what's inside the grouping symbol first, and then apply everything else that's outside the grouping symbol. So let's do the last one. Here we have negative absolute value of negative 4. So let's do what's inside the grouping symbol first. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So we have a negative 4. My final answer would be negative 4. All right, a couple more to think about here. Here we have some equations. We're going to use mental math to figure these out. Not some of the rules of algebra, but just thinking logically what kinds of values would work. So if we had the absolute value of A equals 9, what we're saying is A is a distance from 0. So what numbers are 9 units away from 0? Certainly 9 is 9 units away from 0, so A could equal 9. But negative 9 is also 9 units away from 0, so A could equal negative 9. All right, let's go down to the next one. What if I have the absolute value of negative x equals 4? Again, let's do a little bit of mental math here. When I say absolute value equals 4, that means that my distance from 0 is 4 units away. So the number 4 is 4 units away from 0, and the number negative 4 is 4 units away from 0. But what was inside the absolute value was negative x. So what we're saying is that negative x could equal 4, or negative x could equal negative 4. So let's think about what this really means. If the opposite of x were equal to 4, then x should equal the opposite of 4, or negative 4. If the opposite of x was the opposite of 4, then x should just be 4. And of course we still get those same two answers, 4 and negative 4 for x. What about this last one? This one's really kind of a trick one. This is trying to tell me that the distance from 0 is negative 3 units. But the distance from 0 can't, whoops, not negative 4, but the distance from 0 can't be negative 3 units. There is no such distance. Distance can't equal negative 3. So there is no solution to this problem. There's no values of y, so that the absolute value of y was negative 3. All right, girls, that's it. Take your time. This was a short lesson. Go back and fill in the questions on the left. 2 to 4 sentences of the summary, most important points here. Don't forget, when we have example problems, to get those examples in the left-hand column. So, for example, I want to see this. Solve absolute value of A equals 9. Solve absolute value of negative x equals 4. Just real quick and easy. Get those over in the left-hand column on all the example problems. Okay?